فصل في الحث على طلب العلم والعمل والتعليم واطلب علوم الدين وارجع إلى اليقين فالعلم قوت القلب فيه رضاء الرب.
الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بعد نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدعوة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته والطلب إلى ثوابه سبحانه وتعالى والعافية ورحمة يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك العلم اللدني والنشر الصافي الهدية وأهل بأمانه وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. So, in the past few lessons, we've discussed the intervals of prayer. So, inshallah, in this lesson, we'll be moving on to the Sunnahs of Prayer, or the recommended acts of prayer. So, the section in the book on the Sunnahs of Prayer is quite long and detailed. So, we'll be going through it a bit by bit. So, the scholars have counted that there's probably some have counted more than 1,000 sunnahs of prayer. But obviously, we will not be covering all of them because some of them are merged with other ones. So we'll be talking about it in a general term. And in general, there are three types of sunnahs when it comes to prayer. So throughout this lesson, we'll just refer to the all recommended acts of sunnah. That's the Arabic terminology used. So we'll just call them sunnahs. So there are three types of sunnahs in prayer. Ones that happen before prayer, ones that happen in the prayer, and ones that happen after the prayer. So here we'll be concentrating in this section of the book about the sunnahs in prayer. So the sunnahs before prayer are things such as adhan and iqama and using siwak. Some of the sunnahs that are during the prayer, there are two types of sunnahs that happen in the prayer itself. There are ones called ab'ad and this other section called hayat. So ab'ad, which loosely in Arabic means parts, and the reason they're called that because they take a ruling that's similar to the integrals of prayer. They're not integrals, meaning if one doesn't do them, they're not accountable. But it's recommended that if you don't do them or if you forget them, to do sujood sahw, which is the prostration of forgetfulness. And examples of those are the first tashahhud in Maghrib, Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. In any prayer that's more than 2 rak'at long, the first tashahhud is sunnah. It's actually from the ab'ad, which means it's recommended to do sujood sahw if you don't do them. Also, qunut al-fajr, doing the dua of qunut in the fajr. And as-salah ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his family, ala al-nabi, in the final tashahhud. There's a bit more, but they will come later on as we go on the lessons. There will be more details later, inshallah. And the hayat are basically any sunnah that's not fall in the category of ab'ad. So to clarify, there are two types of sunnahs in prayer: ab'ad and the hayat. Ab'ad are those that you recommended to do sujood sahw if you don't do them, and hayat are all the other ones. And as we go on the lesson, we'll be distinguishing which is which. And the sunnahs that are after the prayer are sunnahs such as doing dhikr, that are recommended after a prayer, and doing those afkar while you're still sitting in the same position you were in the final tashahhud. So inshallah, in this lesson, we'll be starting with some of the general sunnahs that happen in the prayer. there are sunnahs that can sometimes happen in more than one location in the prayer, or happen in the beginning. So the author says, rahimahullah, ويسن التلفظ بالنية قبيل التكبير واستصحابها. He says, and it is recommended to utter the intention of prayer just before the opening takbir, and to keep that intention present in the heart throughout the prayer. So the word sunnah in Sharia means actions which one is rewarded for doing but not punished for not doing. So that's why in English we say they're recommended, they're not mandatory. So we all discussed the difference between the abad and the hayat. So the plural in Arabic is for abad is ba'd. So for example, say the first tashahhud is a ba'd min abad as-salah. And some of these sunnahs are exclusive to men and some are exclusive to women. Or in a different way to put it, some of these sunnahs are performed differently from men and women. So, for example, one of the sunnahs that's for men is for a man who is properly dressed, is when they pray to stand with their feet slightly apart. In Arabic, they say miqdar shibr, which is shibr is like a handspan. So at least with this much space between the feet. So the feet should be slightly apart when men are praying, as opposed to a woman when she prays, she should bring her feet closer. And the sunnah of uttering the intention is for both men and women. We mentioned before that uttering the intention is sunnah. So this is one of the sunnahs that should be practiced by both men and women. And even though the intention is supposed to be in the heart, it is uttered on the tongue to help the heart remember the intention. And it also helps a person to fight off the whispers of shaitan, or as they're called in Arabic, waswasa. And another reason to have the intention present in the heart for the whole prayer is because it helps a person have presence of heart in their whole prayer as they're going from a movement to the other movement. And also it helps a person to not have doubt in the actions that they're doing during the prayer. As long as you have the intention present in your heart that you're in a state of prayer, then you should be in a state of awareness of all your actions, whether they are your body parts that are moving or the words that you are saying. Then the author says, وَرَفْعِ الْيَدَيْنِ مع ابتداء تكبيرة الإحرام. So the following sunnah he says, and to raise both hands together along with the start of the opening takbir. So again, raising the hands is one of the sunnahs that's practiced by both men and women. And this sunnah is practiced whether a person is praying while they're sitting down or they're standing up. In any position a person is praying, they should raise their hand. It's not exclusive for the person that's standing up. And this sunnah happens with any action that is considered raising one's hand. So for example, if someone just says Allahu Akbar, just this act, the fact that you raise your hand slightly, is considered raising one's hand. So that itself is a sunnah. Or even if it's done in the complete manner, which raised all the way up to one's head, Allahu Akbar. That is also a way to the sunnah. But the sunnah differs. So if it's done in the more complete manner, there's more thawab or more reward for doing it. The less it's done, the less reward that one attains for it. And the most correct way of raising one's hand is to, first of all, to look at the place where they're prostrating. So the way that the fuqaha describe it is, when a person is ready to pray, for them to stand straight and look at the spot where they are prostrating. Then as they're looking at the spot where they will be prostrating, they should bend their head slightly forward. And once they pronounce the first letter of the Takbirat al-Ihram, which is Hamza, Allahu Akbar, so as they pronounce that first letter, then they start raising their hand. So the head is slightly bent forward and they say, Allahu Akbar. Hopefully that is clear. With pronouncing the first letter of the Takbirat al-Ihram, that's when you start raising your hand, both hands. The author then says, وَكَفُّهُ مَكْشُوفًا إِلَى الْكَعْبَةِ وَمُفَرِّجَةُ الْأَصَابِعِ وَمُحَاذِيًا بِإِبْهَامَيْهِ شَحْمَةِ أُذُنَيْهِ, meaning, and having the palms exposed, pointing towards the Kaaba, while the fingers are slightly apart, and having the thumbs aligned with the earlobes. So, for men, it's sunnah to have both palms exposed. It's sunnah to have both palms exposed while one is praying. For women, it can be makruh under some circumstances. So, what some of the scholars they recommend for women is to at least cover a part of their palms, because for a woman, her whole arm is considered the awrah. So, if she wears something loose and it only goes up the wrist, every time she raises her hands in prayer, and if her dress falls down, then that means a part of her nakedness has been exposed, which will make her prayer invalid. So it's recommended for women to make sure that their wrist is absolutely covered, but it's even better to cover a part of the palms, just to be sure. And again, like I said, this is just for assurance that the awrah will not be exposed during that prayer. And then the author says, and the palms need to be facing toward the Qibla or the Kaaba when they are being raised. So the sunnah of raising the hands is this way, not this way or this way. So as we're going through this, one thing you should keep in mind that, like I said before, each one of the sunnahs is composed of many sunnahs. So just raising the arms by itself is composed of the sunnah of raising the arms, exposing both palms, having both palms facing the Qibla, having the fingers slightly apart, having the fingers pointing slightly towards the Kaaba. Those are all sunnahs within one sunnah, which is raising the arm with the thumb properly. So, and a person gets a reward depending on how well they do all the sunnahs. So, and then the scholars have said, it is sunnah, one of the reasons that it's sunnah to have the fingers slightly apart, because it is as if each part of your body, including each one of your fingers, is by itself doing an act of worship. When the hands are all close together, it's as if it's one part, but when it's slightly apart, it's almost as if every part of your body is doing an individual act of worship, including each finger. Imam al-Ramli has recommended that when a person does Takbirat al-Ihram, or every time they raise their hand, to have the fingers always slightly pointed forward, not just straight, have them pointed forward towards the Kaaba, and he considered it sunnah. And when raising the hands, when they reach the highest point, the sunnah is they reach high enough such that the thumbs are aligned with the earlobes and the fingers are aligned with the ears and the palms are aligned with the shoulders. So the correct way is Allahu Akbar. So in one action, fingers slightly apart, facing forward, thumbs aligned with the earlobes, fingers with the ears, and palms with the shoulders. And this method of raising one's arms as being complete and from the Sunnah, this was described by Imam al-Shafi'i from the hadith that he compiled on raising the hands. So all these ways were mentioned as all these parts were mentioned as being part of the proper way of raising one's hand. So when someone combines all those hadith on how to raise one's hand, that's the picture that you get. Allahu Akbar, the way that it was described. The author says, وَيُنْهِي رَفْعُ الْيَدَيْنِ مَعَ آخِرِ التَّكْبِيرِ, meaning, and to end the lifting of the hands with the end of uttering the takbir. So the act of raising one's hand, it should keep going until the person says Allahu Akbar. So the fuqaha differed on when should the hands go down. So some have said it should be Allahu Akbar, then the hands go down. And some have said it's with the end of takbir, as in Allahu Akbar. So this was a difference of opinion. If I'm not mistaken, it's Imam Ibn Hajar who said after the person says Allahu Akbar, after they finish uttering the takbir al-ihram, then they bring down the hands. And hopefully, if I'm not mistaken, it was Imam al-Rami that said the opposite, which is you say Allahu Akbar. You say Akbar as you bring it down your arms. And to attain the full sunnah of this action, a person should try to apply all these affirmation, all these mentioned positions of the hands, the palms, and the fingers. And if someone only does some of these actions, then they only get some of the reward. So a person is only rewarded depending on what they do and how much that they do it. The author then says, ويرفع يديه عند الركوع والاعتدال والقيام من التشهد الأول. So the act of raising one's hand for takbir al-ihram, it's not exclusive to takbir al-ihram. So it is a sunnah to do that action every time when you're going for ruku', bowing, and every time you're standing up from ruku', i'tidal, and when you're getting up from tashahhud al-awwal. And inshallah we'll be giving more details in a minute of how these are all done. So in takbir al-ihram, and when you're going for ruku', when you're getting up from i'tidal, and when you're getting up from tashahhud al-awwal. So the way the fuqaha describe this is when someone is going for the bowing position, they should start raising their hands while they're in the standing position. So after a person reads the Fatiha and a short surah, while they're standing, they will start raising their hands again to the position that we mentioned before. Allahu. Then they say, Allahu Akbar, and you keep going down until you reach the ruku' position. For the Hajar, you say Allah, from the standing position, you say Allahu Akbar. Then you go down. And the hands keep going down until you reach the bowing position and until your palms reach your knees. And the reason for this, to have the arms moving the whole time throughout the bowing, is like we mentioned before, is to have the whole body participating in some kind of act of worship. So, since this act is sunnah, a person can simply just say, after they read the short surah, Allahu Akbar, and go straight for ruku'. But this means that the arms did not participate in an act of worship. So the idea is, from your standing position, you say Allahu Akbar and you go down. So this movement, both your arms participate in the act of worship. And this is also the same thing. So this one is also applied when someone is done with the bowing, the ruku', and they're going to i'tidal, the standing position. And this will be kind of the opposite. So from ruku', a person will say, Sami'a Allahu liman hamida. You raise your arm, says Alhamdulillah. So the arms keep getting raised until your face is straight, until your head is straight. The arms keep going up. Once the head is straight, then the arms go down. And this method is the same way that it's done when a person gets up from the first tashahhud. So there is known that there's difference of opinions among the schools of thought about how often the arms should be raised. So I think it's the Shafi'i madhab, and I think in the Hanafi madhab as well, which they recommend raising the hands from when one is going for ruku' and i'tidal and standing from the first tashahhud. While some other madhab, they don't see it as sunnah. Imam al-Suyuti has compiled in a small book what he found to be more than 50 sahih hadith, which recommend raising the hands in those positions. So he was compiling this small book on the evidence of the Shafi'i madhab for doing this act, because other schools of thought they disagree, and he found there's around 50 sahih hadith that recommend raising the arms. Imam Suyuti, raising the arms when someone is going for ruku', i'tidal, and after the first tashahhud, and in the takbirat al-ihram. For ruku' and i'tidal and takbirat al-ihram. But then, as far as the raising the hands after the first tashahhud, that is from a sahih hadith in Bukhari. So there's evidence for raising the arms in those positions from authentic hadith that we know from reliable sources. Then the author says, فإذا فرغ من التحرم حط يديه تحت صدره وقبض بكف اليمنى كوع اليسرى وأول الساعد. Meaning, if one completes the opening takbir, then he should place both of his hands below his chest and to grip the left wrist with the right hand. So, as one completes the opening takbir, he should put his hands below his chest and above his navel, due to the fact that it's disliked to keep the hands raised after the takbir for no reason. So, when someone does takbir al-ihram, they say Allahu Akbar. Having your hands still raised after takbir al-ihram for no reason is makruh. So if someone says Allahu Akbar and just stays like this after uttering the phrase, is makruh, is disliked, because there's no reason for doing so. So the sunnah is after saying Allahu Akbar, the hands should go down, clasping each other, and the hands should be below the chest and above the navel, somewhere within this area. So say Allahu Akbar. And this applies for when one is standing from the first tashahhud. So when someone stands at the first tashahhud, they say Allahu Akbar. So when you get up from the first tashahhud, do not keep your arms up after you say takbir al-ihram, after you say the takbirah. Just put your arms down in the clasping position. And the method of placing the hands is to grasp, is to use the right palm and its fingers to grasp the wrist of your left hand and some of the forearm. So the palm grasps your left wrist and some of the forearms with the fingers. And the positions of the fingers, there's been a difference of opinion among the scholars. Some have said it goes like this. Some said two fingers extended. Some have said one finger extended. Any of those positions are valid, but the way that sunnah happens is right palm grasps the left wrist. So you're grasping with the wrist and some of the forearm. That's how the position should be. And the scholars have said that the wisdom in that is for the hands to be on top of the most inaudible part of the human body, which is the heart. So during prayer, when you're in the standing position and you're reciting the Quran, the hands will be almost over your heart. And one of the reasons they gave, they said it's natural for people when they fear for something, they try to grasp it. And since the heart is the most precious part of the body, it's almost as if you're imitating that action. It's also important to notice sorry, it's also important to note that if one forgets to raise their hands during the takbir, then they should do it during the takbir and not after. Meaning this, if someone is entering prayer, as we mentioned, raising the arms is sunnah, it's not wajib. So a person can technically enter prayer just by standing straight and saying Allahu Akbar. That is correct. But let's say someone wanted to raise their hands, but they forgot to do it. They just stood there and said Allahu Akbar. Then they remember they didn't raise their hand. Then we'll say it's too late. Do not raise your hands. You missed that. You can clasp your hands together, but don't raise them. So, but if someone extends the utterance of Allahu Akbar and the person remembers halfway, then they should raise their hand. So, for example, just to clarify, so if someone completely forgets and says Allahu Akbar, they shouldn't because they missed out, they're late. But if someone says Allahu Akbar, then that is valid, then that is correct. But after the phrase has been uttered, Allahu Akbar, and you haven't raised your hand, then it's too late. You missed the sunnah, then you cannot do it. Lastly, the author says, وَنَظَرَ مَوْضِعَ سُجُودِهِ إِلَّا عِنْدَ الْكَعْبَةِ وَإِلَّا عِنْدَ قَوْلِهِ إِلَّا اللَّهِ فَيَنْظُرُ مُسَبِّحَتُهُ. Meaning, and to look at the place of prostration except when praying in front of the Kaaba. So it is sunnah that when a person prays, they should be looking at the place where they'll be prostrating throughout the whole prayer. Even if someone is praying the funeral prayers, the janazah, even though there's no prostration or bowing in janazah, a person should still be looking down at the place where they would be prostrating if they were going to prostrate. And this sunnah applies even for a person who is blind or even a person who's in a dark place. Even if they cannot see that position, they should at least imagine where they'll be prostrating and keep their vision there the whole time. So there's a slight difference of opinion of where a person should look when they're praying in front of the Kaaba. So a lot of the scholars have recommended looking at the Kaaba when you're there, because that is the Qibla. So the Kaaba will be the only place that instead of looking down, we should be looking forward. But then the Mu'tamad, which is the most correct position in the Shafi'i madhab, is to still be looking down at the place of prostration. So both opinions can be taken. And lastly, the author says, also except when saying Illallah during that tashahhud. So another time where you're not recommended to look on the place of prostration when you're in the middle of prayer is when you are reading the tashahhud, the first tashahhud and the second tashahhud. When you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, it's sunnah to raise one's finger. Inshallah, we'll be going through this later when we get to that session, give more detail. So when a person says illallah, it's sunnah to look at the index finger, which is pointing forward. Even if the index finger is covered, which a person should still look at it. And this sunnah is also has been narrated in Sahih hadith. So it's a well-known and an established sunnah. So, نسأل الله تعالى أن ينفعنا بما علمنا. جعلنا من الصالحين إن شاء الله. آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين.